Hi, everyone. I'm Alicia Greenberg, VP of Membership and Programs at the Advertising Club of New York. Welcome to our virtual clubhouse. On behalf of the Ad Club, our president, Gina Grillo, and our partner company, Pandora, thanks for joining us today for another important conversation in our vertical series. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the health and wellness sector with leaders from Becton, Dickinson, and Gray. I want to thank the team at Gray for bringing us this great content on empathy and marketing in this realm. So our content is all by members and for members. So I encourage you, if you're not members of the Ad Club, to join us. We're all about educating, celebrating, and empowering our over 5,000 members. And you can do that by visiting us at theadvertisingclub.org, or I'd be happy to talk to you directly. Just write to me, Alicia, at theadvertisingclub.org. Love to have a conversation with you. We have lots of great content coming up. This Thursday, we are launching a new program on entrepreneurship. I'm sure we can all have some great takeaways from the people that are going to be speaking on that panel. So I encourage you to join us for that as well. I want to give a quick thanks to our team at the club, the team at Pandora, and my partner Meredith Lipson for bringing this to fruition, because without them, we couldn't make this happen. So without further hesitation, I want to introduce our moderator for the day, Leanne Longinotti. She's head of industry health and pharma at Pandora. So Leanne, over to you to share the great insights that you have. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Alicia. I'm really happy to be here. We have fantastic guests for you, and you're just going to have to listen to me for a little bit before we get to be picking their brains. Let's go ahead and kind of get into a few insights here, and we will get rapidly through some bigger pictures, and then we will introduce our panelists, and we're going to pick their brains the way you're dying to do right now. So the reality about all of us is that we are incredibly connected to our mobile devices, right? And we cannot talk about any type of marketing or messaging or creative or content without also thinking about device delivery and where that content should be, has been, and will be living in the future. If you could go to the next slide, Meredith. So we know that being everywhere your audiences are, whether you are looking to market to B2B or to B2C audiences, the reality is that the reliance on our technology has never been heavier, ramped forward even more by the pandemic. We are very much a mobile first society. When you think about the degree to which smartphones in particular have penetrated every single segment of the population. And for those that we tend to think of being late or later adopters, and 6 in every 10 seniors have smartphone technology, it really opens up how we think about what content to use to reach these individuals, but how and where and on what devices. So mobile is the heart of where we are all living. And let's face it, you just have to lose this for about 30 seconds and realize just how dependent we are. Next slide, please, Meredith. But that's not all, right? Whether we observe the digital evolution of the consumer or the medical professional, the reality is that we have gone beyond the tipping point as a society with the adoption of connected technologies. Just a few quick top line points for illustration. Only 7% of Americans are not online. That is staggering. Even if we look at older Americans, our seniors, 75% of adults 65 plus are online. The average American household has access to 10.4 connected devices. That's a lot. So it's important to think about digital capability, because inherently within digital, there is the ability to feel much more personal to the consumers for the professionals that you are trying to reach, and it is definitely a measurable advantage. If you could click, Meredith, so we can see the HCP side of what this technology looks like. Remember that medical professionals are people too. So their digital habits, their personal device usage, their households' connected devices will mirror the rest of America. But we know that COVID-19 drove digital innovation in medical environments, and it did so at a much faster rate than this innovation would have occurred without the pandemic. Today, 70% of doctors say that they are motivated to use telehealth virtual technologies since the pandemic happened for digital connections with their patients. 9 in 10 health systems plan significant investments in smartphone technologies and digital communication to meet the enormous consumer demand for digital connections with their health and wellness providers. We also can't put aside the human element here, particularly because our topic is what it is about empathy. We would be very remiss if we didn't also mention the cost of this pandemic to our frontline healthcare workers. A recent study by the Kaiser Foundation showed that 62% of our healthcare workers say that the stress and worry of this COVID crisis has negatively affected their mental health. So if you are a B2B marketer, keeping that in mind as a framework to think about in how you reach out to these professionals and what your messaging to these professionals will be as an important lens to look through while you continue all your strategy conversations. So Meredith, if you want to kind of click, then let's click again. There we go. Yay, thank you. So all of these fabulous digital connections, right? The ability that you as marketers have to connect with customers, whether through tech, whether through content, whether through a variety of different entertainment channels and social media, doesn't necessarily build trust. In fact, trust is more challenging than ever. This is very, very important to health and wellness and pharma because healthcare is inherently a very personal thing. Every person's healthcare journey is extremely individual. If you want to flip to the next slide, Meredith, just hit click. Thank you. We as human beings inherently bring our culture, our history, our entire frame of reference in society to everything we do, whether we are a consumer or a professional. And this really colors our world, how we take input, what we're putting out. And so the reality is that culture matters to each and every one of us. And at the heart of this are things like language, thinking about what a person's experience is in different arenas of life. Black and brown communities have very different experiences in America. What is important to their communities is going to look different than other populations. And so using these as a foundation in reaching out to these populations where there is a history of inequities in healthcare is a very, very, very important thing to consider and think deeply about when you're looking for ways to engage through content and messaging with these populations. Meredith, if you would hit the next slide, please. So, trust is particularly hard to earn with everyone. But when we think very deeply about the inequities, the suffering, the issues, what's happening in society for Black and brown communities, we have to really understand what is at heart of this. Some of this is around a lack of trust that is very, very earned, and that is really ramped up when it comes to health and wellness within these specific communities. Creating a message or developing content without considering the wants and needs of these populations is going to achieve the very opposite of your goal. And you have a very high risk of coming off as insensitive, uninspired, and actually offensive. So remembering that these populations, if you would click Meredith, have very specific needs and endemic health problems as the result of these inequities that need to be helped and addressed and spoken to in ways that are very specific to those conditions and those populations is really at heart in making sure that everything you're doing is relevant, sympathetic, and most of all, authentic. Conversations are a two-way street, even between brands and between target consumers or target professionals. I do also want to make a point that this is also highly relevant, even if you are looking for B2B, right? So a Black or brown healthcare professional, a nurse, a doctor, their experience in life, getting through med school, etc., and getting into their practice and doing what they do every day could look very different than that of white populations. So when you think about this and you think of multiculturality to marketing, don't leave professionals out of that thought process because they bring their experiences and their culture with them to whatever they do in life. So first and foremost, in developing a creative strategy needs to be a deep, deep understanding of what the reality is for each group of consumers or professionals that you are hoping to engage with. So if we could just go to the next slide, Meredith. We know that, right? So understanding what COVID has done to particular populations is also really important. So let's go to the next slide. Thank you. Also recognizing and doing a deeper dive into new audiences and new groups of populations that have come to the forefront as a result of the pandemic is important. A group that was getting a lot of attention in healthcare and pharma and wellness was a group called the sandwich generation. 4 in every 10 US adults are kind of sandwiched between their aging parents and helping influence their healthcare journey, making decisions, being alongside them as they continue a complicated process, but they're also doing the same for their children. So hence they are hyper influencers. They are involved with a large number of people when it comes to helping them, doing research, consuming health and wellness, and consuming pharma. But this group of individuals has become even more important in the pandemic as they have taken on a lot more of those decisions and caregiving for their aging parents. Next slide, Meredith. There's been a cost to these unpaid family caregivers because the COVID connection and that COVID overlay to what they were already doing is adding 3 times more worry and 3 times more stress to their lives as a result of the CDC study. We happen to know that. So any type of marketing and creative and strategy and device decision around influencing these important caregivers really needs to come from also a place of understanding the extra stressors and the extra responsibilities that are sitting on their shoulders across multiple individuals before, during, and hopefully once we get to a post-COVID reality. Thank you for listening. We are going to move on from me, hooray, into talking with our panelists. So please let me introduce, if we can, Yolanda with Gray Health. Are you there? Can we see your beautiful face? Yolanda Haynes, who is joining us from Gray Health. We're honored to have you. We have Tim Jones, who is also joining us from Gray Health. We have Ankit also joining us from Gray Health. And we have Tony, who is from BD Healthcare. We have, oh, John, do you want me to introduce you too? No, he doesn't. Okay, we're all we're all good. So we know that our listeners are dying to get into your brains. So this is a question for all of you. How has your marketing changed or shifted over the past year as a result of the pandemic? Whoever wants to hop in.
I'll jump in. This is Tony Ezell with Becton Dickinson. First of all, thanks, Leanne, for having us, joining you today. It's this last 16 months, 15 months has certainly been unprecedented. Nothing we could ever have predicted or prepared for. And so when I think about how it's impacted us at BD, it's probably been a lot more transformational than it has been for some of my colleagues on the call here today. In fact, the great team can attest to this. Just by way of background, I worked in the pharmaceutical industry for Eli Lilly and Company for almost 28 years before coming back to BD in January of last year. So literally 45 days before we went into the lockdown, I started with the medical device company. And it was to help to really elevate what we're doing in marketing, and boom, it all happened. And so everything that I came to do, we had to put on warp speed. And a big piece of it was build our digital platform, our backbone, because quite frankly, on a global level, we had nothing to operate on. So I'd say the biggest thing it did for us is it actually made us believe. Put it like this, internally, we didn't have teams. 30 days in, we had teams globally. Internally, we didn't have a marketing cloud that was executed globally. 30 days in, Marketo was rolled out globally as a tool connected to Salesforce.com and many other things that we now have in place, Showpad. We didn't have some of these critical digital platforms upon which to actually communicate, execute, and track our execution campaigns with customers. I think the other thing it did for us is it made us shift very quickly from brick and mortar B2B company to one that had to start listening to customers differently. Both healthcare professionals sitting in hospital institutions, you alluded to some of it, I'm sure we'll get into it later, but the way they needed to interact was different. But it also helped us to think more about the end user more than we ever had. Now actually having put ourselves in a position where we're much more of a consumer-based company, which is how I ended up being able with Gray around things like COVID tests, which were not even in existence this time last year. So look, it changed quite a bit for us in marketing, mostly around how we listen to customers differently than what we've done before, more consumer-based. But I'd probably say the biggest thing is, like most, I think there's some data out there that would suggest for some industries, it accelerated that digital transformation by 6 years. I would actually put BD in that camp, where it accelerated our transformation by a year.
Tony, if we could stay on this for just a moment, and then I'll get back to my original question for Tim and Ankit and Yolanda. How were you listening to your customers? How did that happen?
Yeah, I got two answers to that. We were listening to,
Okay.
and first of all, I have to decide who the customer is. But I'd say we were listening to the customer inconsistently. That would be the first part. But if you think about the kind of company we are, it's a medical device company, manufacturing company, made up of a lot of engineers. Historically, the way we thought about listening to customers was in our user design phases of developing devices. You go out and listen and develop a device, as opposed to really understanding what are the things within the workflow, the continuous customer journey that is impacting their ability to solve a problem for customers. And so that was probably the biggest difference, is bringing in, I'd say, more marketing-based customer insights processes and technical upfront engineering-based processes. And that was the biggest shift. And then we honestly didn't listen to consumers. We didn't have a consumer market.
Right.
And so that
Right.
was tremendously different, where we actually had to go out and do full-on customer, let's say consumer-based insights work. A lot of what our pharmaceutical teammates, and certainly what I was used to on the pharmacy, all of that was different for me.
Right. Thank you. So Yolanda, Tim, and Ankit, what was your year of learning and changes and what your experience was?
I'll go quickly. I'll jump in on this one. Just from a creative perspective, I guess the year was unprecedented in many aspects. It's forced what is predominantly a face-to-face, really personal, creative experience in any advertising agency, you know, coming up with ideas, conceptualizing, you know, the real magic or sort of lifeblood of any agency. It's forced all of that into a really weird remote setup. So we've had to do a lot of, especially within the first few months, a lot of change in the way we approach that. How do we facilitate our teams so that they are, you know, engaging in the right way and connected, you know, properly, especially, you know, as I'm sure most people are aware, a lot of people hadn't even met each other. As the agency grows and we hire more people, and there's a real lack of physical knowledge of your colleagues. So that's been interesting. And I think as a result, you know, we've seen ideas and, you know, as a consequence, the whole industry change very subtly. You know, there's been in the first blast of COVID, the uncertainty phase, there was a lot of marketing which shifted to the, you know, we're all in this together type of humanity, communication. And then obviously, as we've slowly got more and more confident and the vaccines have come out, we've got into a more optimistic place, which is great. I'm glad to see that change. So I think from a creative point of view, that's the main challenges that we faced in the beginning. And it's kind of set the tone for all communication for this past year.
Yeah, and Tim, just to build on what you were saying, right? I think if you look at the way we started understanding our customers, and Tony very much aligns with a lot of what you said as well, is you know, typically in advertising, it's qualitative insight mining that's been the mainstay. But you know, I think this was a pivotal moment for marketers in the industry where we really started understanding the power of data. But there's a caveat to that, is data done right. Because you can't just use numbers and graphs and bar charts to say you understand your customers. It's about really looking into what they're saying out there. And you know, the one thing we realized is in, you know, your classic qual research, at the end of the day, it's inherently biased. People will tell you what they think you want to hear just because of the nature of it. But data really gave us these nuggets, this insight-based approach as to what's really going on within the field. You know, with COVID, if everyone was so raw, so vulnerable, but no one fully wanted to admit to it. And so we started taking a very data-first, data-rich aspect in addition to your qualitative thinking. And you know what we started to see is what was initially considered maybe a slightly new, or you know, I'm going to use the most overused word in pharma marketing, disruptive approach to customer understanding and insight marketing, is now starting to become the more effective way to do it. And so we see more and more now is, you know, a lot of instances you see a propensity to want to come back for the same old kind of insights and things like that. But data has really led us to taking that next leap, being a little more future forward, understanding where everything it goes, right? Because it was very easy to say, oh, we're going to switch to a digital platform. Okay, that's great, but so what? You know, so the idea here really was to take that, and I think it's worked. It's really helped us, you know, think about what the approach will be in the future. You know, sometimes it feels maybe it's a little ahead of its time, but we'd rather be ahead than be you know, just along with the rest of the crew. But yeah, it's been fascinating to see it happen and happen so quickly. And you know, once your eyes open to the power of good data, that's it. There's no going back. So I think that's been the one area that's risen to the top.
Understood. Yolanda, did you want to weigh in as well? Oh, shoot. You don't have, we're not hearing you. Let's try again. There, we got you now. Oh, no. You know what? We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you. Great. Now we can't.
I'm going to keep getting you now.
We live in a Zoom world. Yes, this is reality.
We live in a Zoom world. I
We
don't
do.
know what's happening.
We can hear you.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll go. Tell me if I cut off for some reason, but I've been buddied up with Ankit and Tim in many of these discussions with our client in these transformations over the last year. So definitely would echo a lot of the same. I think the element that I played the most in was really trying to get our clients to think differently. Like I had to be the one in some instances to kind of open up discussions to explain to them that months and months of research that we did to find insights didn't matter at the particular time we were in. And it took a while for people to really realize it. And I really had to sit there and dig in and kind of say, many people are in survival mode right now. Like they are scared to death, don't know what tomorrow will bring. All of the research that we've done before doesn't really matter to anybody at this particular time. And it drives you to really try to change your mindset, to really feel the patient and get in their shoes, because I think many times we go through what Ankit was talking about and say, well, I would do this and I would do that. And it's like, you really have to convert over to be that person, as Tony is talking about, to get through. So a lot of change that we've done to date as well is accelerated application of behavioral science strategies into our work, because I think really trying to move behaviors is just that much harder right now, and the marketing teams realize it. So it's not as if we haven't used these methods before, but I've seen a big increase in it.
Interesting. So when you're talking about data-driven insights and trying to change behavior, even backing up from that, how did you apply data, or did you, for authenticity?
It's a great question. So to sort of tie it back into empathy, right? Because empathy comes from authenticity, and I think that's sort of where it tends to be most impactful, right? You tend to skirt around being superficial, but if you can get to the core of what matters, it enables you to be like, I'm going to use buzzword after buzzword, but authentically empathetic.
Mhm.
So, but I think that's sort of what's really helped us, and it tends to sort of equip us with a way to not only communicate with that certain sense of understanding, but even the creative that comes out of it has that ability, and which automatically then pivots into behavior change and makes your customers feel like you're hearing them. You're actually listening to them, not just sort of hearing them.
Right. So when you feel that we've got the authentically empathetic, that's a tough one for me today.
Yeah.
Right? You've got that. How do you know it's resonated or engaged? What are you doing to ensure that it stays on point with the group of consumers that you are speaking to?
Oh, you will know very quickly if it's not working. It'll be like a smack in the face, because it will, all of your strategies will be rejected. I mean, you have to really sit and take a look at your approaches to everything, particularly on social. We talk a lot internally about the different communities and populations are on different channels for a reason. They like having, open, honest conversations. And for us as advertising marketers, us invading their space is how it's felt sometimes when they're being hit with these messages that just really don't relate to them, at the particular time. Mm-hmm. And you kind of have to look at those approaches and either say, leave that channel alone and let it live for what it's doing for that community, or your approach has to be different. Look at your language that you're using and change it, and really get in with something that is relevant first, before you really try to push through on anything about your product.
And just to add to that, the most important thing about data or insights or anything that we learn, it's not necessarily about what you say to your customer, but how you say it. And, the impact that can, like, just tonally, you can be saying one thing, but how you say it, when you say it, especially with considering all the, the drama that we've all been facing, existential and otherwise, this past year, you have to consider those things, because it can impact very negatively, even though you may be saying the right stuff.
That's so interesting. I'm sorry, please go ahead, Tony.
No, go ahead, Leah. Go ahead.
No, please talk. No one wants to hear me. You go.
I doubt that. But just to add on to the importance of really the trust element that I think is at the end game here, showing the empathy. I think it was, quite frankly, we in the medical device industry were probably in an even tougher situation, in the sense that hospitals were under assault, if you will. If you think about healthcare professionals at the height of when these things were going on, I can remember being on a call with a number of CMOs across different industries back in last May, and there was a lot of discussions about the kind of commercials that we were running, the kinds of digital content that we're developing. But if you listened to healthcare professionals as people at the time, as well as consumers, what you heard is a little bit of what Tim and Yolanda were getting at, which is the words you chose to use, the imagery you chose to use. We're going to either turn people off very quickly based on where we were. Again, to Yolanda's point, never been here before, pandemic. None of us have executed everything throw it out the door. And you had to really be thoughtful about how you communicated it. And for us, it meant that, and I'm proud of the way the organization operated. There's some information just came out last week, and looking at brands, corporate brands, and BD, quite frankly, which had never really done anything in a proactive manner, did a lot of things last year, and it helped elevate our brand. But it was mostly because we leaned into that empathy, in support. It wasn't about us. It was actually about supporting the front line. It was a heroes campaign, like a lot of people had, but really making that connected into the frontline employees and pulling that string all the way back to what I know my buddies over at Greer very familiar with, back to life, which is, you start to feel those undertones of fear, feeling like I'm separated, the need to connect, all the things that quite frankly impacted some groups, Leanne, as you talked earlier, more than others. If you didn't incorporate that in at least how you went to market, maybe your imagery and your content still had some of the same elements, but if you didn't at least change how you approach customers, then we clearly would have a negative impact. And like when Yolanda said, you would hear about it immediately. And we did have a couple of those on a global level. In France, we had to pull it down like that, because the reaction was basically like, you guys don't get it, you don't care, you don't understand what we're going through, even though your message may be right. And so I think last year taught us a lot about the importance of understanding the human behind what we're doing. That's a little bit.
Tim, you're nodding your head. Would you?
Yeah, I'm very much in alignment and agreement. That's so true. And then one thing, just to, I know this is about empathy and healthcare, and I think it's important to note, we in healthcare, and we work primarily within health and the world of healthcare. We almost have a right to be playing in this sort of empathy, especially during the pandemic. It felt more natural, as opposed to some of my colleagues and friends who work in more consumer advertising, or, sort of bigger brands or over-the-counter sort of stuff, where, there was a real fine line between empathy and the situation we were all in, and, your favorite crisp brand talking about we're all in this together. We are lucky in that regard, where the communications we've been doing have been backed up by brands, products, treatments that are really helping, in a true and trustful way, the world, which I think, just leans into empathy done right. It is so important.
I also think that right that healthcare has to be authentic, because this is what healthcare is. It is also creating a space where if you do get that wrong, it's even more awful to the group that you're speaking with. So the getting it right versus wrong is also a higher risk as well. Did you have anything that you did that you wanted to pull back creatively during this past year?
That's a very good question. Yeah.
I mean,
Yolanda, what do you think?
I'm not even in creative, but I will take my perspective on this, Tim. But I would say no, because of the people at Gray. It's such a diverse and inclusive group. We saw a lot of things coming. We pulled things down before they even went up. So I would say no, because we had the foresight. I can't recall like any piece of creative that went wrong, so to speak.
That's fantastic. Not every brand had the beauty of being smart enough like you guys to make accurate predictions and see what was coming and have strategy and data. And there are still, a lot negative feelings within groups of people for brands who did not get it right during that really sensitive, critical time.
No, and that's such a great question, because I think the one thing about and anything like we start empathy is going to be more important than ever. But the one thing is, it's never not been important. But what happens now is and there's a lot of studies starting to come out, is there's they're saying there's going to be sort of some sense of PTSD that comes out of this pandemic, that everyone's been through, the social isolation, healthcare and things like that. So this is not a one thing that you do for 6 months, right? I think we're going to learn more and more as we go into building our brands over the next 6 months, the next year, maybe forever. And so I think where creative is going to have, and Tim, I know you and I have spoken about this quite a bit, like brands, agencies, marketers, we're all going to have a moment of reckoning where those tropes, safety areas may be redefined. And frankly, if they don't, then that's just a pity. You don't often get a chance to truly evolve the way you think about your brands creatively in such an extent ever, right? Ever. Like, it's usually one drug comes out or one product comes out that changes the game, but there's a whole scenario. So I think a lot of what's working and not working is TBD. Because you see it now. There was like a dip in social interaction, then there's going to be a massive spike, and then we're going to plateau out. And where it's going to be that quote unquote new normal or whatever, post-pandemic roaring 20s. Everyone has their own terminology, but that is empathy is going to be determined at that point. So I don't think we can even judge what's working and not. We're going to have to kind of fly by the seat of our pants a little bit for some time till we figure out, okay, we know this is okay, we know this is not okay, but I'll have to open it up.
Do you have predictions or thoughts about what's next as more people are becoming vaccinated and beginning to feel safer? You guys are very strategic thinkers, and you do a lot of homework. What are you thinking moving further into 2020 about what empathy may or may not look like?
Yeah, I'll take a first stab at that answer, and I think Yolanda's smiling because we've spoken about this quite a bit. I think the one thing that's definitely here to stay is the confidence and knowledge or information line between patients, caregivers, and doctors is probably going to be smaller than it's ever been. People are always going to be, we always knew they were empowered. I had one of my old clients in the oncology spaces. Do you really think in oncology patients are going to now advocate for themselves and drive decision making? I was like, not decision making, because you trust your oncologist with decision making, but they will want to be a bigger part of the process beyond just being the person that gets the treatment. So experience and those sort of areas come into being. Vis-a-vis, empathy becomes more important than ever. Your usual patient support approaches, tactics, solutions, choose your company terminology of choice. Like those areas need to be rethought out from a different angle. And that's why empathy is really going to be critical, because they want to be a bigger part of it. We've already seen that, right, in many disease areas. So I think that's one thing that's here to stay moving forward, is they're more empowered decision makers for their as far as their health and treatment is concerned.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Ankit on that one. He's right. We talked about it many, many times. The level of empowerment of self, we see it now. We see it being kind of mandated, or either what's resonating best in tone from messaging that's coming out. We hear it in research. I definitely believe that is kind of here to stay as we move forward, and agree with Ankit that we need to revisit patient support materials. We need to revisit health literacy. And what I mean specifically by that, as we went through COVID, I'm hearing stories of just people of color, particularly Black people, kind of being lost on things that they're hearing from healthcare providers, like wait until a person turns blue. What does blue look like on a Black American? Very different. So when we think of things like that, we have to revisit it. We have to revisit how we are defining family. Like you just went through tons of data talking about sandwich generation and multiple generations within a home. The family is not the married couple and a dog. And that person that is sitting up there caring for one person, which may be an elder, is also caring for their child and caring for themselves. So when we are building out these patient support materials, we have to think holistically of what these people are truly going through. To date, we have been doing a lot of giving information that serves a purpose specifically with the relevance to our products, and we have not been thinking inclusively of what else they are dealing with around them. So sometimes we're not successful because we have not helped pull them out of the positions that they're in.
Right. But you're thinking about it, which, right, I mean, it's going to happen because it's there, and right, then the work begins, which is a positive. I'd like to ask Tony, in these next phases, how are you thinking about the healthcare providers who are now looking at different challenges than they were this time last year? And what does that mean for your B2B strategies?
Leanne, can you hear me better now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sometimes in our new work environment,
Yes.
the Wi-Fi decides that it's going to go to one bar.
Oh,
Even when you start out at 4 bars. So
we understand.
So sorry about that. Honestly, it's a really easy one. I can answer it with a visit I'm taking to a customer's location tomorrow. An example of how this has changed the way that we'll need to work with some of our customers, particularly institution-based customers, is how they expect to deliver care. And this actually comes full circle, where a lot has happened to the degree that people have had to be treated where they are. But the thing about this, then all of us, for 6, 7, 8 months, if we had to see a physician or healthcare professional and we didn't have a COVID-related issue, we had to do that virtually. We had to do it in a different way. And guess what? In the data that you talked about earlier about telehealth, with the institutional level, a lot of them have found that they can actually get better outcomes by treating people in their households. So Yolanda, going into households that they hadn't been going in before, and treat somebody, send them back to an environment that was not conducive for getting the right outcome. For some of us who've seen diverse communities and different things that where the setup is not necessarily supportive, that matters. And so where we see the opportunity changing, quite frankly, is a lot of the systems, hospital systems, if you will, are extending their care to homes. And by extending their care to homes, how we communicate directly is moving us to more of a direct-to-consumer on a lot of things we would not have communicated before, like surgeries and things like that, where you would not have necessarily talked to the end users much, while they're looking for help. So if you think about the understanding that we've had on the customer journey before, it kind of stopped at the healthcare professional. Now it's extending in the medical device industry, which is very, obviously familiar in the pharma space. It's going beyond just when they're treated by the healthcare professionals in the institution, to how are we helping that communication path. So all of the stuff Yolanda talked about, like patient education material, all of that stuff needs to be connected now in a way that you couldn't do in the past. It's changing the way we have to operate as a company and the role that marketing plays. So on one hand, it's scary because it's new for a lot of people in the medical tech industry. On the other hand, it's exciting because we can play a new role in helping to deliver better outcomes.
That's so interesting. We have a few questions from the audience, and I don't want to neglect them. The first question we have is, how do you translate empathy in an ad tech heavy marketing environment? What kind of business and tech partners are you looking to help with a digital engagement strategy? We just lost Ankit. Yolanda or Tim?
I think Ankit was so excited to talk that he just like blew up his connection.
And we just lost him. This is such a question for him.
I know. I mean, I can tell you to date, like a lot of tracking that we do is based on sentiment in terms of what's coming through from the content that is being pushed out. It's a like a primary criteria for when we track, and that gives us a lot of information as a supplement to other tracking measures that we have that can kind of tell us if we're being empathetic or not. And honestly, I think there are some tools that are still to be built to track this better.
This sounds like a Tim question to me. How do you think empathy will play a role in point of care communication for advertising moving forward? Will it be similar to communication used in other media channels?
It's so difficult to have a precise answer. I think it has to change, regardless. So from the COVID situation, for sure, things have changed, and the way we talk to people will change. And when the world is faced with big problems, creativity creaks through the cracks, and we discover complete new ways to do things, which is awesome. So there's that to look forward to. So I think, yes, things will change, and the way we talk to people will naturally change. Ankit's just reappeared.
Yes.
And yeah, so there's an echo.
This is our world.
Yeah, this is the world, which hopefully will change back.
Right, exactly.
And again, at the end of the day, we're talking to humans always, and you have to consider, it's not just feeding people data, feeding people knowledge, and it's not just about educating people. You have to be empathetic. You have to be entertaining in a sense. That's our job as communications experts and marketers, or it's to deliver serious information in a compelling way. So that is always something that needs to happen. Otherwise, we'll bore people to death. And just in terms of speaking to, if I remember right, the question, in healthcare, empathy is the biggest key. The HCPs are people to healthcare professionals, doctors, whoever you're speaking to. Just keep that in mind. Do not, don't overcomplicate things. Speak to the heart first, and then the brain second, and that's where I find the most success in communication.
Thank you. We have a question for Tony. having done both B2B and B2C marketing in your career, what do you see as the different approaches in empathy in either channel?
It's an outstanding question because I think it's evolving, to be honest with you. Because I've been in multiple B2B roles. I also worked in the animal health space for a little while. And if you think about the news that we just saw last week about the cyber attack on JBS, that was a partner and a customer. I think probably the biggest difference is the methods in which we communicate. And you'll hear me talk about customer journey mapping quite a bit because I think it is the grounding mechanism that we're using and that we used on the consumer side to ensure that we were delivering on the insights that really matter. And so that's probably the one thing I think is the same, but how you execute on it historically has been very transactional. And that's where it's changing. Now it's becoming more, again, empathy, where they are in the process, the challenge they're having as an institution, all the way down to the healthcare professional. I think we've actually been able to connect with people that we otherwise would not have ever connected with leveraging new channels. I'll give you a great example, if I may, just for 1 second, because a practical example, without getting into the specifics of it, but this is not something that BD had done before historically, but leveraging multiple channels to engage a infectious disease vice president within a hospital institution, right? This is an administrator. This is not someone who's treating patients. It's seeing patients every day. But there's a level of understanding and empathy for the impact that an infectious disease has on patients and also the people who are taking care of them. We were able to leverage digital, if you think about platforms, in a way to get to that person and bring content to her in this particular case that helped her to understand the value to the outcomes for patients and also to making life easier for her employees, which is actually the most important thing to her. So if you think about empathy, I think we always think about it as the reason why someone will go and buy our thing. Yeah. Well, if you go back through the customer journey, it's actually the thing that unlocks the journey. And in this particular case, the empathy was around making the lives of my employees who care for these patients easier so that they don't have to worry and they get joy out of outcomes. We leverage different touch points. We would have traditionally just count on the sales rep to deliver that message. Leveraging content that we're able to get them to through things like emails directly to platforms that are customized makes all the difference. That is how it changes in the B2B world. It's the perfect example for moving from a literal technical look at the outcome you get from using this catheter or this venous application, from that to let us help you make it easier for your employees to work better, get better outcomes. I think it's the way of the future. It's what our customers actually appreciate now and how we communicate with them versus coming in and selling them, which is basically, I think, how we've been seeing it. I don't know if that helps to put it into context, but that's the big difference, is that you're probably dealing more with the people who are taking care of the patient, and you need to find out the points of empathy there, versus a person who has depression or a person who has oncology and issues you may be dealing with directly with them. Hopefully that.
Absolutely, great point. I think we're near, Alicia is probably like, time to turn it over to me. So to keep us on time, we've got a few questions that we weren't able to answer, but we will harvest those and get them to the group so that you do get the information. I just really want to thank our panelists, Tim, Ankit, Yolanda, Tony. Thank you so much. Your time is really valuable and we appreciate you giving us some of it. Thank you.
Yes. And thank you, Leanne, and thank you to Pandora and Gray for bringing us this content. And to our attendees, you're exactly right. So we're going to make this even easier. We're going to take these questions and we're going to answer them via our blog. So panelists, I'm circling back to you, and we're going to share answers to these questions via the blog. And we are also going to share a copy of this video with you, as well as the insights afterwards. I know, I apologize, we have some sound challenges. We'll try to clean that up in the video after as well. And we want to thank you all for staying engaged with us. Stay tuned on our site for other things we have coming up. And our community is yours. So we hope to see you again in the Advertising Clubhouse. Thanks to everybody. See you again soon.